So here's the wonderful part about consumer Christianity. You get high numbers.
Mm-hmm.
You can give them what you want. So what did people start wanting? Hey, we want shorter services. Okay, let's get them in and out. We want a children's ministry that keeps them entertained. Okay, let's do that. And so we have children's ministries, they look like Disney World. They're amazing. There's a lot of things that I think the church was doing in a good place just to get people to come to church.
Sure. So they could see Jesus.
Yeah.
Or maybe that didn't know Jesus, or same for the kids.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it was from a good place. They're like, hey, let's get these people in here. We want them in here. We want them to hear the gospel.
Yeah.
But the problem is now it's created and catered to this facilitation of the church was built for my needs.
Yeah. Hey, Julie.
Hey, Taryn.
So today we're talking about consumer Christianity. I know lots could be said about this topic. And I'm sure we'll talk about a lot of it, but, this is probably a term that some folks have heard, I would think. But when I think about what is consumer Christianity, one of the things that comes to my mind is that it's really focused on you, yourself, and you're consuming what you need versus putting the focus on the Lord.
Yeah, I think we saw a shift in churches having to do this, or maybe they didn't have to do that, but they did for the sake of attendance, where we were always focused on God and Jesus. And we have this, in Titus 3:14, it says, meet the urgent needs of the people so that you will be fruitful.
Yeah.
So we know churches are for communities, but something happened, and I would say in the 90s a little bit, where we noticed where people would come to church and they want to be entertained.
Yeah.
They need amazing children's ministry. They need someone to coach them through their marriage. They need help with their kids. They need financial help. Everything had to be met by a program in the church.
In order for the people to
be thriving.
Sure.
Okay? And the church, says yes to this because they're like, instead of the world teaching them, let's teach them a biblical concept about finances, a biblical concept about marriage, which is all great and wonderful, I think. But if the programs weren't there, people didn't want to come to worship God. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's almost like there's a criticizing, right, of what's lacking for what they need.
Right. So what you see is people go into churches and they're like, well, they don't have this, and their leadership is not doing this. They don't have this, and they don't have that. Well, every church is not called to the same mantle.
Yeah,
I would say
absolutely.
And I think there's some aspects that overlap in all churches, obviously, but I think sometimes because if it's not available as a program or some access to that, people are like, it's not a really good church. It's not a healthy church. And really what it is you're just not healthy as a constituent, and you don't want to.
As a consumer.
As a consumer.
Yeah. You're not healthy as a consumer when you're having that thought process. Yeah.
So what happens is the church is now having to, they really want this, and they really need a women's ministry, and they need this, and then we're building all these things, which I think they're all great, by the way. I don't think that.
Yeah.
But have you asked the Lord, where are you placing me as a church where I can learn and grow and have accountability from a community?
Yeah.
Because if there's a program that they eliminate, are you leaving the church?
Yeah.
What's happening here? What are we really? And so the church was built on that. So here's the wonderful part about consumer Christianity. You get high numbers. You can give them what you want. So what did people start wanting? Hey, we want shorter services. Okay, let's get them in and out. We want a children's ministry that keeps them entertained. Okay, let's do that. And so we have children's ministries, they look like Disney World. They're amazing. There's a lot of things that I think the church was doing in a good place just to get people to come to church.
Sure. So they could see Jesus.
Yeah.
Or maybe that didn't know Jesus, or same for the kids.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it was from a good place. They're like, hey, let's get these people in here. We want them in here. We want them to hear the gospel.
Yeah.
But the problem is now it's created and catered to this facilitation of the church was built for my needs.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's for the furthering and the growth and the development of the community at large.
Yeah.
But it's also, we go to worship to praise Him. to focus on him.
Yeah.
And so what happens is people are not changing. They're not going through the sanctification process. They're just
Sure.
going through all the programs.
Yeah.
And so it puts pressure on churches and pastors and leaders to keep jumping through hoops.
Yeah, to bring all these
apparently
things.
the gospel's not enough anymore. We need illustrations and acrobatics and entertainment. The gospel's insufficient now.
When you say that, the gospel's not, that just grieves my heart, because the gospel is enough and we've made it not enough because of the consumerism.
Yeah, and the gospel is sufficient to walk you through all the areas of life and all the brokenness and have the restoration and all the answers in the Bible. And so I think we've created this in hopes of getting people back into church. And so what we have is a group of very critical people who will tell you, well, this is what the church needs to look like. It needs more evangelism. We need more prophetic. We need more children. We need to put more money into the children's ministry. Everyone has an opinion.
Sure.
And so now pastors and leaders are in a place where they're trying to figure out how do we navigate this? And here's, I think, my issue with this. Pastors are called to start churches, the ones that are actually called, by the way, not the ones that are called with ambition, but the ones that are actually called to build houses of worship. God has given them a vision.
Yeah.
That's supposed to be executed.
And it's their unique vision too.
Yes.
It's what you were saying,
Yeah.
Their mantle versus the next church's mantle and vision is going to look different. And I think that's okay. That's the beauty of the body of Christ.
Yeah. And I think what we try to do is where are you getting that vision from? Where we question the person that has put the most at stake. Where are you getting that vision from? Ours is better.
Yeah.
Those type of things.
One of the things when I was thinking about just this conversation this morning, and my background is marketing, and as I was thinking about it, and I just wrote down a couple of notes, when I think about consumer Christianity, it's transactional. The shorter services, my kids are going in, they're getting XYZ, I'm going in, getting XYZ. It's such a transaction. And then, we're looking for convenience. Does it suit my schedule? Does it suit, my lifestyle? And what we've done is we've marketed the church as a product. We've marketed the church as a product rather than a lifestyle. And when I think about that, it makes me sad, because we want people to know the gospel. We want people to encounter Jesus. But if we've created this such a consumer environment, are we not leaving enough room for them to encounter Jesus?
Yeah, I think it also sets people up so as a society, we're more consumer driven too.
We are.
We're faster. We have social media or the internet. We buy things from it.
We're impatient.
Yeah, we want we're looking for the microwave God, microwave Jesus. We want it fast, quick, and the churches have catered to the culture. Okay.
Yeah.
Of what needs to happen. So we'll have 5 services so we can get everybody in and out, because there's a need for that. And so what happens there is a compromise that happens. And you can say there isn't, but there is. And there's a compromise that happens. And the compromising part of it is you will probably not see as much fruit. So your numbers are great, but your people are not thriving in the places they should be thriving. Church cannot be this program you go to every Sunday morning to check your box off that you've been to church and you got out.
Yeah.
And you got a little bit of a good word. And it makes you feel good. The lifestyle that we're not teaching and not implicating is breaking families apart, breaking marriages apart, keeping people bound in sin, and they can't get out.
Yeah.
And you're well, you're saved, you're good. And according to Scripture, that's the bare minimum. Because if that was the case, we wouldn't be complaining about milk to meat.
Yeah.
We could all just hang out on milk. Does that make sense? So there is a growth process in your walk with the Lord. And so I think consumer Christianity halts that. And so I see churches now, the pastors and leaders, trying to take that back a little bit. And you can see the pushback. You can see it in attendance. You can see it in what they're interested in, what they're not interested in. You see the pushback of what's happening.
Or when there's, when you're used to such a routine Sunday morning, right? And then there's a call for additional prayer meetings or additional this. And like you said, the attendance is low because, and I understand everyone has family priorities, and there are certainly things that, me and my family, we can't attend everything. I get that. But when you think about the heart posture of the body as a whole, are we really being intentional about being in the presence or pursuing intimacy or the prayer as a body? And I feel like there's going to be more push in that area.
So if there's a prayer meeting and a Christmas show with a drama, everyone's going to the drama. Mm-hmm. The prayer is not a place where, that's the most low attended.
The prayer meetings.
Yeah. Like nobody wants to go, we're having intercession. Those are for the people that have the intercession anointing. You know what I mean?
Like they're not called, like not everybody's called or,
Everybody's called to pray.
That's right.
If you are a born again believer, you are called to pray. Mm-hmm. So we go back to this, I'm not entertained there. It requires something of me. Mm. Right? Prayer and intercession requires something of me. Whereas if I go to the Christmas drama, I can just be entertained.
Yeah. Well, or if we kind of transition that to like a Sunday morning, it's like that's why sometimes when you might look across a church congregation and not everyone is actively participating in worship, right? They're there to consume. They're not there to host his presence. They're not there to worship. They just want to be fed something.
Sure.
And like you and I talked about just in recent conversation is that there's a time and a season for that. And we all are guilty of maybe being in that season. But the reality is that, the Lord wants your heart and not just to consume the goodness of him.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He wants relationship.
Yeah. And so I have a friend of mine who was talking to me about, I think the church needs to do this, and I think the church needs to do that, and I think the church doesn't have enough of this.
Yeah.
And I always tell people, the pastor has clearly stated the vision. Mm-hmm. You're not required to be here.
Yeah.
The question is, the pastor's asking, are you partnering with the vision God has given him? And so in a city, even the fivefold ministry, okay, let's talk about fivefold.
Yeah.
You can see there'll be one church that's heavily evangelical.
Yeah.
One may be heavily prophetic, or one may be heavily teaching, right? You can see that.
Yeah.
That can happen. And so people always, especially on base what they're aligned with, they want more of that. We need to be doing more of this. We need to be doing more of that. But all of it works together.
Absolutely.
And you can go through seasons where the Lord is saying, hey, build, expand. Yeah. So in the building and expanding, there may be a season where because that looks different, you can't be as heavy on evangelical, right? And so when we look at the Acts church, I think that's where people get confused. It's like, hey, there was actually two sets of people, and if you go into Acts 6, like to take care of the business of the church, right? Because the widows felt like they were being neglected. And then there was the teachers and the apostles that were taught to be in the Word of God to teach the people. And so I think churches just kind of need to go back to the basics. And I think this is like a very trend that we keep talking about everything, going back to the basics of what's needed. And then people also feeling that the church is not supposed to fulfill your need in an area.
Well, I think God does that.
Yeah.
God is supposed to be the one to fill that need. But then what happens, like taking care of widows, it's because there are absolutely times when we're called to be the hands and feet of Jesus.
100%.
And yes, we should take care of the widows and the orphans and those that are in need. But at the same time, there has to be a level of obedience to build, right? If the Lord is calling you to build something. And so, like you're saying, there are certainly going to be times and seasons where it looks different, like how you're building.
And I think the needs of people now, it's just so very interesting to me when people say, well, I needed the church and they weren't there. They abandoned me or they neglected me. And I want to be like, what does that look like? Because I was telling somebody this the other day, like, when I became really sick, I don't want everybody texting me.
Yeah.
I don't want somebody was, you know how I am. They're like, Julie, can we set up a meal train for you? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. You know how I am about food and how weird I get about things like that. And I'm like, no. They're like, no, but everybody wants to. Oh, I'm sure they do. But I've been in some of these people's kitchens and the answer is no. And so like everyone's need is not wanting to be catered to and texted every day and checked up on. When I'm resting or recovering from something, I want rest. And so every now and then, and when my pastor and wife says to me, hey, if you guys need anything, just reach out to us, that's sufficient for me to know that I have trust in them that if I do need anything, I'm going to reach out. I'm in a mature place enough that I don't need you checking on me every single day to make sure we're doing okay. Does that make sense? I've come to that place of that. Now, that's not always the case. I know people go through difficult times and seasons, but I'm not requiring that. The Lord is sufficient. His grace is sufficient. And if I'm going through a season where I'm like, I think I need some help, or I think I need some counsel, or we're having some difficulty with this, can you help us? Then I can reach out. And so I don't think they're supposed to need, when Titus says you meet the urgent needs of the people, what's an urgent need?
Sure.
What is an urgent need?
Yeah.
Like you might think it's your mental breakdown, right? Some person might think, hey, my father's in the hospital. I need you to come pray. Is that an urgent need? Depends on who you ask, right? Yeah. And so I think we just need to be a little bit flexible with what we're thinking the church is supposed to provide for us, And I think people have difficulty with that because they think every need is supposed to be met by the church.
Yeah, not to get off on this tangent of church hurt.
That's an episode for another day.
But if we were not in a place where we were just focused on the consuming and what benefits me, I think that there wouldn't be so much church hurt that's going on and that you see and that you hear of so frequently, because you're activated at that point to be the body, right? And to serve your community in whatever capacity the Lord has put on your life and whatever your personal mantle looks like, And I think so often is that, like you said, we come to the church with our opinions and our critiques of things. And are we submitted? Are we partnered with the vision of that house? And if not, are you supposed to be at that house?
Correct.
And that's okay to question the Lord in that. Just because that's where you were born and raised and you went to church your whole life does not necessarily mean that that's where you're supposed to be in that season of your life. And it's almost like you're loyal to the church or the denomination or the pastor versus loyal to the Lord. And that, that's just kind of points back to the consumerism part of it, is you're there almost because it's comfortable for you versus being obedient to where the Lord is directing you.
Well, the other, and this is a very bold statement, but I'll say it, I think consumer Christianity and the people who operate in victim mentality. You're a victim.
Yeah.
And the church is supposed to be catering to you. And that mentality cannot drive how the church is operating.
No,
does that make sense?
It cannot. That's not from a victim mentality. That's not a healed mindset. There's a lot we could say.
Yeah. Taryn's giving me the look like, be careful what you say from this point on.
Oh, well, I'm like, how much time are we going to have here?
So that's just my opinion.
Sure.
Okay. I feel like when I see consumer Christians, I'm like, oh, there's a victim mentality here. I spot it.
Yeah.
And the victim mentality is, you need to cater to me. You need to hear me. You need to see my giftings. You need to utilize my giftings. You need to, it's this place of what can you do? And so then I hear people say, I just don't know where I fit in. I was like, probably in that pew seat over there. Just sit down.
Just sit down. Sit down for a season. Yeah.
Sit down. Hear the word of God. Let it penetrate your spirit. Let it change you. Yeah. Let it wash you. Where do I fit? I mean, it's not an application for employment.
You're right. But I think I feel like some people are in that place where they're looking for that position. They're striving. They're in a place where they're striving instead of sitting with the Lord. Yeah. And being fed or serving in a different capacity than maybe what you feel the call of God is on your life.
Yeah. So I don't relate with this, okay? Because everyone's like, well, haven't you ever been to a church and they like overlook your giftings? Yeah, no, that's never happened to me. Because I just show up and I'm like, hey, I want to serve. What do you want me to serve? They tell me where the need is. I fill the need. So I don't ever feel, I tell people this all the time. Somebody asked me this. We're going back to church hurt again. So we probably need to do an episode on that. But we're going back to church hurt. someone asked me, don't you feel used? They're using you. You're volunteering so much. You're the first person there and the last person out. Don't you feel used? Like the church is using my husband and I. And I said 2 things. Nobody can use me without my permission, first of all, and no one can manipulate me without my permission.
Yeah.
Okay? Even if the church thinks they're using me, it's irrelevant. And I'll tell you why. Because I do what I do because the Lord tells me to.
Sure.
So if I'm doing what God is telling me to do, I'm doing it out of obedience to God.
Right.
It's completely irrelevant if you think it's too many hours.
Yeah.
Or if you
that's your
think,
perspective.
Yeah, that's your perspective. I feel the fulfillment of what I do in serving the house based off what the Lord has told me. Okay.
Yeah.
And so when you're saying to me, I feel like you're doing too much, you're only a volunteer. Like you shouldn't be doing this. The staff
Right.
should
They're
be
not
doing
paying
this.
you.
Yeah.
Right.
The staff should be doing this. No. I do this on behalf of the staff because I know what it's like to be on staff at a church. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so I think it's just strange to me. So you don't have a servant's heart.
Well, that's exactly where I want to go that's the difference of the right heart posture and the wrong heart posture is because your heart is to serve.
Yeah.
And so nobody's using you or taking advantage of you because your heart posture is in a place to help and to serve. So, And
I don't need the pastor and the wife to tell me, thank you so much for serving and all that you do. Here's your monthly award. It's irrelevant.
Yeah.
Because honestly, I don't even do it for pastor or his wife. Yeah. I do it because God has asked me to do this.
Right.
Like my loyalties lie to God.
Well, and I think people are serving in seasons of their life to be seen.
Yeah, sure. Oh, yeah. That's a real thing.
Because they're looking for that approval. And that's the wrong heart posture. That's the wrong heart posture. And for me, I honestly, now I can say this because of the season of life that I'm in now, but if it was sitting in the back of the room or cleaning a toilet or praying with somebody, on the street, that's okay. Because if the Lord is telling me to do that, that's what I want to do. And it's not about being seen or being heard. But I think so often, going back to the consumer side of it, is it's a transaction. We're looking for, okay, if we do this, then we should get this, kind of approval of man.
Sure.
But that's not what the Lord honors.
Yeah.
At all.
And I think also it's this place of the church should affirm my calling and should affirm what he's calling me to do, affirm my talents and my skills. And I need that to be able. I have been in churches that have no clue about some of my giftings at all. You know why? Because it's not irrelevant. It's irrelevant to what the Lord has asked me to do in that season.
Sure.
So they don't need to know about all of my skills and all of my talents because the Lord is calling me specifically to do something. I remember when the Lord asked me to do youth. It was a moment of, you're punishing me. I get it. This is punishment. Youth. Middle school and high schoolers, you have to be anointed to do that. I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Like I was trying to wrap my brain around that instruction and what it would require. Because it's a lot of investment and a lot of, and I just told the Lord, I don't want to do this. Like, I don't want to do it. So my husband and I did it. We did youth. Absolutely loved it. What we learned and just being around the kids, honestly, it's just amazing. Just to even be around them and to be youthful and young, and you kind of
joy.
Yeah, they do, and they have that, and also understanding their pain because we didn't grow up in the same world they did. They come across different pains and different experiences, and just being aware of that and learning that from them and understanding what's going on, and so it was such a beautiful thing. But it wouldn't have been my choice because I think for some people, they're like, with your giftings, why are you going to youth? Youth is not a demotion.
Right. Let's talk about that for a minute. It's not. And
oh, I'm sorry. Here, I'm going to give you the future of the world. That's the demotion? No. Children and young people, that is a very heavy thing to carry. And people act like they've somehow out-anointed themselves from serving young people.
I know.
And I just think it's such a strange mentality to have. And so we do, and churches do that by hiring what? Young people that are inexperienced in ministry to start out in youth.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's what we do. And so I think it's just it's the complexities of the church that we've allowed to happen. And like I said, now we're drawing back. Everyone's going back to the basics, going back to the real thing. And so that's what we're seeing that's happening. And so I'm just interested to see what's actually going to happen to the actual consumer Christians. Are they going to step in and host the presence? Is that what's actually going to happen? Or are we going to actually see people leave the church because it's not meeting the need? You know, like I'm curious to see what happens. There has been a decline in attendance since COVID that has not come back up since. We do see it, an increase in attendance during election seasons, because that always happens, and war seasons. Any type of domestic violence, like any type of
people realize
terror.
they need to get on their knees in the season.
Yeah, so you'll see that. And so I think it's just interesting to see. But there are many churches that have not hit their pre-COVID numbers.
Yeah.
In attendance. And so you have to ask yourself, what happened? What are their expectations in regards to COVID?
Yeah.
Like, where do these people go? Where are they getting fed? And so in consumer Christianity, now you can sit home, watch it on your phone, you know, and there's so many ministries out there and they're being fed through these ministries. So now they don't have community. And so they've isolated themselves, or they have to fly to Florida, or they have to fly to New Mexico, or they have to fly to California to be with their community. And that's just not how the church was supposed to be created. It was supposed to be within your local church in your local area.
Yeah.
And so I think there's just so much shifting that's happening. People trying to navigate that, but everybody wants what they want.
Right. And I mean, I think a lot of people experience that with convenience, right, of digital technology during COVID. But I mean, come on, it's New Year's here and it's almost 5 years, 5 years later. Why are we still using that as an excuse? And it's because it's convenient for people. But community is so important. We talked earlier about just intimacy with God, and that's more of an individual walk with the Lord. But community is so important. When you were talking about serving in youth, it's just what I kind of picture in my mind is like when the Lord
having a mental breakdown. Oh no,
no,
it happened.
I mean, you might have. That's not what I was picturing. Okay, I was trying to be like all sincere, but I literally see this picture of like when God does that with somebody, it puts you in a place where you're uncomfortable. He's stretching out your tent pegs. Like I literally see that, and so you have to be grateful for those times where it's uncomfortable. And you and I have talked about even the podcast. We're like, we don't want to be on camera, but here we were stretching our tent pegs, I guess, Lord, like we want to be obedient to what you're calling us to do. And the Lord's going to call you to do things sometimes that doesn't seem logical. But that's the beauty of walking with the Lord. And we're not meant to be in this consumer role with the Lord. That's not how our walk is. You take away all excitement and adventure in your relationship with the Lord when it's so transactional. Yeah.
And so I think what's happening now is a lot of leaders and churches are kind of going back to, hey, why did God send me out for ministry? Why were we built as a church? What's actually happening? And going back to the vision that God has given them. And as that shifts and changes, people are uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And that's why you're seeing people leave churches, watch things online, those type of things. That trend is happening because I think leaders are going back to, why did God call me 20 years ago? What was the vision?
Yeah.
What does it turn to? Why am I here? Why are we here? And so I think even leaders are starting to be in that place of intimacy to be like, why did I start doing this? What was God's call in my life? And so that's something we have, just like a bad habit, like we have to break that. And we have to teach people and help them to be more self-aware that they've turned into a consumer. And they may not be aware they've done that.
Yeah.
And so it'd be like, hey, this is consumer Christianity. Like, and so how did you get here? You know, what happened? And so I think those conversations need to take place. And not that I don't think programs are amazing. I think programs are awesome, but where are you placed? Where's God placing you? What's your purpose there? And the purpose doesn't always have to be, I get to put on display all the giftings that God has put in my life. That is not the purpose of a church all the time. There is a pruning season God is putting people through.
Yeah.
And you may not be hidden. You may be protected. You may not be ready, even though you think you're ready,
Right. Right.
And so I think it's like, and so when people don't get affirmed of their talents and their giftings, they leave as well. That's consumer Christianity. That's victim mentality.
It is.
And no one's affirming me. So this is how I see that. If leaders are not affirming you and God's not affirming you in the place you're at, so the two things need to happen. You need to take a seat, or you need to ask the Lord in this season, Lord, what is it? What is my purpose here? What do you want? What would you like me to do?
Yeah. I just feel like someone who's kind of asking those questions, it's clear that there's just some wounds there,
Sure.
And you have to be okay to ask yourself, why am I feeling this way?